The title of this lesson is called He Went That-A-Way and We Should Too. And what we're doing is looking at Saul and his transformation into Paul and his impact on not only his time period, but every time period since. And so first what we want to do is look at Saul of Tarsus. Who was he? Because when we understand who he was, it will help us understand who he became. And so I have 4 scriptures here, and then I want to look at a couple of points about Saul's life. So Acts 8, if you wouldn't mind reading, please.
God began to burn Stephen and warned him deeply. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison.
Acts 9, 1-2, please.
Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem.
Okay, I'm going to stop right here because these 2 scriptures point out how Saul persecuted Jesus and the way. He went out of his way more so than most anyone in Scripture we can identify to persecute and kill Christians. He was at least there when Stephen was martyred, which is very important. And so he hated the way, which was Jesus or Christians. Now, these next 2 scriptures that help identify are Paul testifying to someone about his pedigree, his resume, as a Hebrew of Hebrews before he became Paul. So Acts 22, 2-5, if you wouldn't mind sharing, please.
Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of his way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council call themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished.
And Philippians 3, please.
If someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law a Pharisee, as for zeal persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law faultless.
So in both of these last 2 scriptures, he is speaking to people who used to be like he was. And part of that, as we'll examine, is he's trying to let them know, I was like you. You do not have to stay like you are now. There is a better way, if you'll pardon that expression. So, we want to next explore Saul's redemption by Christ. Because if you think about it, who was less likely to be redeemed by Christ than Saul? Not many people. And we'll explore how that impacts us today as well. So Larry, would you mind reading Acts 9, 3-6, please?
As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do.
And if you read 9, 15, 16, please.
But the Lord said to Ananias, Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name.
So the first point that we learn in this is God chooses who he will use as his instruments. And we hear about calls God calls, and he called Saul. And the second thing, Saul was a grown man. He wasn't a young boy. So the point there, as we mentioned earlier, is it's never too late to be used by God for his will. As long as we're here on this earth, God can have a purpose for us if we avail ourselves to him to be used for what he wants us to do when he wants us to do it. And the other thing I think is kind of interesting, and we've probably all seen people like this who think, I'm sinned so badly that God can never forgive me. And so Saul's example is someone who sinned but yet was still forgiven. So part of the example, when he was Saul, Hebrew of Hebrews, he was way over here on this part of the spectrum. He sinned immensely against Jesus and the way. And part of this lesson is you never sin so much that God can't forgive you. Now, at the end there it says, I will show him, on Acts 9:15-16, how much he must suffer for my name. So, can you read 2 Corinthians 11:20-28, please?
Yes. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelleted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger of in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger of false believers. I have labored and toiled and have been gone without sleep, have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concerns for all the churches.
So, have any of us suffered as much as he did? I haven't. So, this sets up a principle that's going to come in a minute where he says the key verse in this lesson that I want to share with you. But we have to understand how much he suffered before we can appreciate what that means. Now, his suffering helped prepare him to show God's provision to him and for him to show God's provision to us by what he went through as well as what we go through. It helped him to understand others because he went through a lot of the suffering that most of us have gone through and even more. Not as much as Jesus on the cross, but he went through a lot of suffering. Who can read, or can you read 2 Corinthians 12:9? Because there was another thing he suffered.
I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
So his suffering gave him credibility for his ministry. Because as we suffer, we know he suffered more. What he learned that we'll talk about in a minute, we know we can learn from as well. So we just set the precedent about Paul's suffering when he was Saul. And after he became Paul and the suffering that Jesus had him to experience and how we benefit from that because of the credibility that gives him in writing the epistles he wrote that can guide us to live our lives more peacefully, purposefully, and more successfully. The next verse, he went that way and so should we, is one that I discovered I'd read many, many, many times. And earlier this year when I read it once, it just hit me in the face differently than I'd ever been hit before. And it's one single verse. It's very simple, but I think it's very profound as we go through the trials and tribulations of life. So Philippians 3:13b. Right. Yeah, thanks.
But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead.
Simple, isn't it? This thing is, because right behind this is where he talks about he presses on toward the mark of the high calling. And that's what we all focus on. That's what I focused on over and over and over again. But this, to me, sets up so many things that can help us every day. So he says, first, but one thing I do. So he's talking about his human priority, the one thing he does. And when he says, forgetting what is behind. Now, so many times it's easy to get caught living in the past. And we live in the past by guilt, things we did that we're guilty about. And God forgives us when we repent and believe in Him. And when He forgives us, we can shed that guilt and give it up. As He said to Peter in Matthew 18, He says, Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. And of course, when I read that, I focused on, wow, that means I have to forgive someone 77 times. But if Jesus asked us to forgive someone 77 times, how many times will He forgive us? Won't He forgive us more than He's asking us to forgive someone else? Yes. And so when we go to Him and ask for forgiveness, we can shed that guilt and forget about it. So we don't allow the guilt to shackle us in the past. If He forgives Paul and Saul, He can forgive us. So what's the other thing that living in the past does? We regret. How many times do we live with regret the things we did or didn't do and focus on that and not what is in front of us at the present and the future? So the old expression, we can't cry over spilt milk, can we? And the other thing that happens is when we suffer, we have a tendency to ask the question, why me? Why did I get cancer? Why did I have a heart issue? Why did I lose a child? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And as we've talked in this class before, to me that's the wrong question to ask, because that focuses on me and it focuses on the past. And if we live in the past, whether we have an anger issue with somebody or something else, if we live in the past, we'll never be able to grow and become the person that we can be by living in the present and the future. I thought I saw a hand go up. So, and why me is not even important too, because if we look in Job, the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. So it doesn't matter. We don't always have to have done anything to suffer. Now God has to at least allow it. But Satan's out there looking to cause problems for us at all times. Any comments? No?
I was going to say, I never
Thank
thought
you.
of Satan just out there kind of looking for opportunities, and you didn't invite it.
Well, I think that's
That's an
true.
unpleasant
And
thought.
unless he's busy giving someone else a problem, he's looking to give any of us a problem.
Yeah.
And that's his, he's trying to win souls for him as well. So, now, the other comment, and straining toward what is ahead. And to me, I think that word straining is so interesting by itself, because you remember all the things that we just read a minute ago that he went through? And so he's only saying that he's straining after going through all of that? To me, I think the descriptor should be much more expressive, because it's similar to saying, wow, I had to go through all of this. I'm really having to work to go forward because all these things I went to. And the question I think that we ask when we're going through suffering is, what now? What am I supposed to learn that can help me in the future? What am I supposed to learn so that I don't suffer twice or three times to learn one lesson? If I'm going to suffer, I want to learn the one lesson that I'm supposed to, so that if I'm going to suffer again, at least it's for a different lesson. Proverbs 3:5-6. Bob, would you mind reading that, please, sir?
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight.
And who could read Matthew 6:33? You mind, please? 6:33, please.
But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well.
So we're instructed on how we should move forward when we're in the midst of the suffering. Trust the Lord, seek first his kingdom. And then the second thing as we go forward is, don't worry. My mother was a tremendous worrier. She worried about worrying. And my daughter has picked up that trait from her, and she worries about everything. And I have to tell her, don't worry about it. All worry does is cause more problems. And we'll identify one here in a minute. So, Matthew 6:25-34.
Therefore
Carol?
I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what will you wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, please.
And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, ye of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
And yet, how many times do we worry? We find ourselves worrying. And then when we worry or don't worry, either one, how many times do we find that most things work out? And most of the time, the way it works out, it wouldn't have mattered whether we worried or not. So I have the quote in here that Tandy gave in a previous class from her aunt Lucille Braden. Worry is interest paid on trouble before it's due. And I think that's so true, because there's no benefit. Have any of you seen the movie Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks about the Cold War, swapping the spies from Francis Gary Powers for the Soviet spy? And the Soviet spy named Rudolph Abel, Tom Hanks' character, who Tom Hanks was a lawyer trying to negotiate the swap in the movie. And the spy for the Russians, he was going through, he didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know if he'd get sent back to Russia, if his own people would kill him or not. He didn't know what would happen. So repeatedly in the movie, Tom Hanks would ask him, aren't you worried? And he had a deadpan expression every time that I loved. And he'd say, what good will it do? And he was at peace and calm the whole time, even though all of this uncertainty was swirling around him, because he knew it wouldn't do any good to worry about it. And I thought it was kind of interesting, since he was an atheist and a communist, but yet he was able to not worry. And we are probably all of the age where we remember the old expression that says, don't sweat the small stuff? And it's all small stuff. So that's another way that we can help live each day without having an issue. So what we want to do is we want to live in the present, because the present is all that matters. And what we do in the present will create a past that will greatly influence our opportunities and dreams in the future, but we can only impact the present. And if we focus on that, like the golfers, if you watch a golf tournament, golfers only focus about that shot. They put everything behind them out of the way. They don't worry about the next hole, the next shot. They focus one shot at a time, because that's all they can control. And that's all we can control is the present. Yes, sir.
How do they get to where they can control that one shot?
Well, if I could answer that, I'd be on the golf course right now playing Sunday golf to win some big money. That's a good question. So, the righteous will live by faith, it says in Romans. When we live in the present, free from past snares and not worrying about the future, what's that mean we can do in the present? Can't we enjoy it better? We can enjoy it better. Whatever time we have. Dr. Haddon Robinson said, time is our enemy disguised as our friend. So too often we let the past and future take away from what present that we can enjoy. And if we enjoy the present, we'll forget about the past. If we enjoy the present, what's that going to make the future? The future will be better than if we worry about it or focus on the past. So what I want to do is summarize the 7 principles that we've discussed this morning. First is, if God can forgive Saul and use him for his purpose, he can forgive us and use us. And there's nothing so great that we can do that we can't be forgiven by God if we'll go to him and confess and repent. And so I know you know people like I had that thought, I've sinned so much that God can't forgive me. And that's not true. We have to help those people realize no one has sinned so much that God can't forgive them. We have to forget what's behind us. Saul, forgetting what is behind. You think he thought about the crimes that he committed and felt guilty about it as he was trying to go forward and establish churches? He couldn't. Because if he'd have felt guilty, and other people wanted him to feel guilty because they wanted to stop him, if he'd have felt guilty, he couldn't have accomplished what he accomplished. We don't worry about anything. It's all going to work itself out. Don't worry. We don't want to rely on our own knowledge or understanding. A lot of the problems I've had in my life, I relied on my own knowledge or understanding. And it didn't work out as well. We want to seek first his kingdom. If we seek his kingdom first, we're going to be aligned with what his purpose for us is day by day. We want to trust his plan for us. I don't know about you, but I've been in situations before where I had to ask him, is this really what you want me to do? Because it was things beyond what I thought I was capable of doing in some cases. And he can use us to do greater things than we think possible if we'll let go and let him use us for his will. And then every day is a gift. Every day is a gift we have to use. And it doesn't have to be profound. We don't have to run for president or be an astronaut and go to the moon or anything. But every day, if there's something positive from it, there is no telling who we might touch that impacts someone well beyond our lifetime. It could be as simple as planting a tree. And if you remember, our founding pastor Logan Cummings said, "Blessed is the man who plants the tree that he'll never sit under the shade of." So there's no telling what things that we can do that might help someone well beyond when we're here. I appreciate the opportunity to share this morning. You are all more quiet than you normally are, or that we ask for, but we appreciate you being here with us, and we hope that this has given you some food for thought and something that might take and use with your family. Yes, sir.
I read something the other day that kind of really got my interest. It says, when Satan continues, to bring up your past, remind him of his future.
That's a great comment. That's a great comment. Because when we think about our past, it just brings us down. And we all have things that we probably regret or feel guilty about doing at some point. And all that does is stop us. Except for Ralph. Ralph's the only one that doesn't. So, any other, yes, sir.
Don't worry about tomorrow, God's already there.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I was raised with why worry when you can pray?
That's a great comment also. That's a great comment. And we have the ability through just our life, through people we talk to, people we interject with, by doing things or dropping comments. We never know when one of those comments might change somebody's life. We never know. Yes, sir.
One of us had a thing all her life that, it's not to worry because God's in control, and so she personally has all these situations that she doesn't worry about, but she says he's up all night, and I'm going to let him have it.
I think that's smart. That's smart, and I mentioned in a class a few months back that when I was laying on the table in Round Rock at Baylor Scott and White and going in for a second heart procedure, and I had a doctor I'd never met him 5 minutes before the procedure. He didn't know what he was going to run into. I didn't know what he was going to run into, and I probably had never had a more peaceful time in my life because I was able to relax. I couldn't do anything. So I was able just to relax and let it go. And so sometimes when we think we can do something, we cause ourselves more problems. And if we know we can't do anything, it's easier to let go and let God take care of it. All right. Thank you again so much. We really appreciate the opportunity. And as Arnold Schwarzenegger said in the movie, we'll be back. Okay.